usually how it works. Go. Welcome everyone to our North Ogden City Council. Meeting now will come to order. We'll begin with an invocation and pledge allegiance by Jonathan Call, our city attorney.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful to Thee for this day, for the chance we have to gather and to discuss our town. We're grateful for this beautiful earth and for the weather which we've enjoyed. And please bless us that we'll be guided to talk about those things that'll be of most importance to the city. And please help us in our decisions and our discussion. We say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next.
Silence their cell phones.
Got a note. I just got to read my note. Please mute your cell phone so that it won't disturb our discussions this evening. The first item on the agenda is our consent agenda to discuss and action to consider the minutes on May 1st and May 8th of our city council meeting. Any discussion or questions for the council? Or any changes?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
It's been moved to approve the consent agenda. No.
Second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We'll move into our active agenda. The meeting is now open for any public comments. Introduce your royalty.
My name is Julie Anderson, 940 East, 2600 North. I'm going to start with introducing this year's royalty for the North Ogden Junior Posse. But before I do that, Krista, she's going to kill me. Krista took over last year as the main posse leader and has done an excellent job with all these kids. I believe we have, 25 kids this year in the posse? 26 children in the North Ogden Junior Posse this year. So that's always exciting for me to see our numbers being up there and stuff like that. But this year I want to introduce you to our queen, Jaylee Rasmussen, and then to our all-around cowboy, Lex McCormick, who I am very pleased to and say an honor, became the Weber County Junior Posse all-around cowboy this weekend and will represent the North Ogden Junior Posse every night at the rodeo. So we're very excited for them. And then right here, this is Cadence. I get the two mixed up. These two are sisters. This is Cadence. She is our second princess this year. And at the contest, I believe she's 7. She just turned 8. So this was her first time to compete, and she did really well and won the Miss Congeniality Award, so we're very proud of her. And standing next to her is her sister McCabery, who actually competed last year for the first time and won the county contest. So she represented North Ogden last year, but because of her age, she wasn't able to compete this year, which wasn't, as you can see from her face, she was not very happy about. So I'm going to turn the time over to them because they're here for you. Okay, whoever's speaking. Okay.
So just tell them, say, I want to invite you guys out to our North Ogden Cherry Days on July 3rd at 6 o'clock.
I want to invite you guys all out to our North Ogden Junior Posse Cherry Days, July 3rd at 6 o'clock at the North Ogden Arena.
Thank you. It brings back great memories of my days in the posse.
And I'm going to stay up here because I have several questions for you guys, but I don't expect you to answer them tonight. Just have your pencils ready so you can answer my questions. I've been looking into the park impact fees and the costs, and I was quite surprised as I started looking at the fees how much more it is to actually the park impact fees are for an individual residency compared to a multi-unit. And I'm sure there's reasons for that, but there seems to be a huge discrepancy in that. But my biggest question for park impact fees was more about how we use them. And I've asked several times, are they used just purely for new parks? Can we use them for improvements? And I was mostly told that the park impact fees are used for new parks. So I got looking into the city code and into that. And in the code under 3-3-2, there is a Park Acquisition and Development Fund paragraph. And it says there is an established fund to be known as the Park Acquisition Development Fund in the city. Now, do we have one? That's my first question. And this is where all the permit fees are deposited. It says other funds from time to time can be deposited in there as the city council seems needed to be done. So in other words, you can transfer from somewhere else if you need. But this was the interesting one to me. Use of funds. The funds deposited in the Park Acquisition and Development Fund shall be used only for acquisition, planning, or improvement of public parks in the city, as the city council may prescribe. So actually the park impact fees, from as I read this, and I would like someone maybe to look into this a little bit more, or maybe John, he's more the legal side of this. Does that mean that we can actually use these park impact fees for improvement? And if that's the case, then we need to be careful how we're spending these funds, because we have several parks within the area that require upgrades and things to be done. And we are actually going at some point to take most of our park impact fees and put it into the amphitheatre. So that was my first set of questions. They're not hard, I promise. Then about the ordinance fee that you're doing tonight, I had a couple of questions. The one is in section 5-3-4, under section C, public parks. No person shall operate a sound amplification device within a public park which is clearly audible at a distance of 75 feet from the device, unless operated pursuant to a special permit issued under CCNO 5-3-12 of this chapter. My question for you is, how does this impact our cherry days? Because we use an amplified system, it's the only way everybody can hear what's going on. And it does most probably reach more than 75 feet. So I need to know on that one, do we have to get a special permit? We've never had to in the past, but as you talk about that tonight, you have to think about how these particular rules impact events within the city that are just once a year or maybe twice a year. The rodeo grounds occasionally has other activities like a queen contest, and they use amplified sound. It's the only way that we can be heard. You cannot yell in a rodeo arena. It just blows in the wind. Again, under part of that is, it says all amplified events shall utilize the city-installed sound system unless approved by the Parks and Recreation Director. We actually, the Junior Posse itself, owns their own amplification system for the whole Weber County, and it is used by each posse within that system. But we've never had it approved. So again, this is a question that I'm bringing up. Is this something now this year, if you approve this, that we now have to start going and talking to people and showing them the sound system? And so it's really starting to encroach upon how well we will be able to perform this. There was another one, but it says time of loudspeaker use. No loudspeakers may be used to broadcast sound at the amphitheatre unless authorized by a city-sponsored event. Our Queen contest starts before that. If we don't, those kids are riding. As you can see, their outfits are quite decorative and they're extremely hot. And so we have to start at 9 a.m. in the morning, which requires, again, amplification. So those are my questions on the ordinance. I also had some questions, and I just want this clarified. In John's note to the city, he claims that the biggest change is that fireworks will now be allowed to be lit. Oh, never mind. That I was reading that. That's done. I didn't have to worry about that one. I wanted to bring up very briefly just some concerns I have or questions I have about this development with the Double Art Ranch. My first being the amount of money in that we're actually we're giving in exchange for this. I actually worked it out, and it's $321,191.40 that we are giving when it comes to the dedication in lieu of impact fees, and yet we are only getting $1,200,000 for the land. So Mr. O'Piken is benefiting greatly from that. Also, it talks about vouchers. I'd like to know how the vouchers work. That's all I need to know on those. It says the city shall cause a detention basin and public park to be constructed on the property. Do we require a public park? I understand about the detention basin. We're going to need that with the sale of the one on 2700. But do we actually need the park? I get the impression it's almost an agreement between Double Art Ranch and the city that's one of the requirements, which actually then he can apply towards his green space within the city. And so we are then again giving him a great deal of green space that he is not responsible for in any way, shape or form, monetary-wise. So again, I'd like kind of a clarification on that one. It says the city shall provide at no cost to Double Art Ranch 2 solar inspections and building permits at a location of the DOR's choosing. However, it does not state where that is and what they are for. And I would like some clarification on that, please. Those are some things as I read through it that are kind of making me a little nervous. We're also the one that are doing the drains and all of that kind of stuff, and then allowing Double Art Ranch to connect into those, which saves them a lot of money also. So at this point, I see the city on kind of the losing side. Now, that's just my opinion, but I see the city monetary-wise, we're on the losing part of this, and I see the purpose of the detention basin. We need those, but I would dearly like to see that we maybe if there is a park, that maybe that become part of Double Art's responsibility and not so much the city's. If he wants green space, then he, as a developer of the additional development that he's going to do, should actually be made to put in maybe a little more than what was talked about at the last meeting, which was, I believe, a very small, minute thing. Those are all the questions I have. But they are certainly, for me, especially when it comes to Cherry Days, I don't want them to be able to shut down our Cherry Days activity when I have over 200 children at the arena. It's a great night, so please, if the residents of North Ogden, I noticed you have a poster on your door that lists all the events of Cherry Days, and you never list that event. And it is actually done in memory of Ron Brown. So it would be nice that if in the future, that would be included in the list of events that are included in Cherry Days activities. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and questions.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I sent a letter to each of the council, but I did want to get it in the minutes if I could submit it to recorder. And it pertains to the amphitheater ordinance that is to go on the docket today. And the main point I'm making is that at the Planning Commission meeting, the proposal to do phase 2 was approved by the commission, but it was approved based on ticket sales limited to 4 tickets per authorized parking space. And I think that is a very important thing to have put into that ordinance, so that that's recorded. It was based on that very thing, and it was not mentioned in the ordinance. That will be important for anybody else that's using the ordinance, and not just the city. As the city follows that limit, it also pertains to those that will be allowed to use the facility as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn.
Aaron Christensen, 2428 Barker Parkway. I know you've seen a lot of me over the last few months, and because of the things I've learned in our involvement with the amphitheater, you will continue to see me. Tonight, your agenda includes discussion on the city sound ordinance, among other things. Like you, I have a life which includes many commitments outside of city business, so I wasn't able to give you the feedback previously. I'd like to share with you tonight the hopes that you will listen and consider ongoing influence this project is having in our city. First, for the record, I still adamantly believe this amphitheater does not belong where this administration has chosen to build it. Yes, it is there. As I continue to study city documents, the intent of the original parties is very clear. The city intended to preserve open space. To quote from one of the documents we've received from the city, describing Barker Park, it says, "The land purchased allowed the open space to be preserved and for the community to better enjoy natural environment. The city is able to preserve this land and allow the community to access its natural beauty. The services of Leonard Grassley of MGB&A of Salt Lake City have been retained for the design of an open space park to allow for wildlife habitat preservation and community access. An arboretum will be developed to provide greater variety of natural landscape and more wildlife habitat. The plan also calls for the development of nature trails and gardens. This type of natural environment could not be provided if the land remained in agriculture. Development of an amphitheater is taking place on an old cattle pasture located on the south portion of the park. This amphitheater will be turf and thereby provide the opportunity for community to enjoy plays and lectures in the park, and for wildlife to pasture on the grasslands. Other parklands are designed and planned to provide nature trails, gardens, native plants, and vast open spaces. The city is developing Barker Park with sensitivity to the environment. Walking trails, interpretive areas, an arboretum, gardens, picnic areas, and amphitheater are being developed. No ball fields will be developed in the park, and the open spaces will be planted in natural grasses and maintained to accommodate wildlife. The significance of Barker Park is that this natural area is located in the center of the city, is accessible to the citizens. The wildlife will not be driven out by development because Barker Park will preserve and enhance the wildlife habitat. This isn't my words. This is from somebody in the city who applied for the Award of Excellence Implementation of Quality Developments and for other grants. So to acquire this beautiful land, city leaders made agreements with original owners, then the city, acting in what the city attorney later described as possibly the only situation like it in the world, built a subdivision with the intent of helping pay for the park. As developer, the city made statements and agreements that none of you were part of. However, that doesn't discount those agreements. In another effort to help pay for the land purchase, it appears the city applied for the grants of state of Utah. They described the natural hollows and how they would be preserved. A map of the 2001 Parks and Rec plan was used to show the city's intent for this park. Additionally, other applications were made in pursuit. The city described how Leonard Grassley's firm was involved in designing environmentally sensitive development. This is a far cry. What we see today is a far cry from the project we're witnessing. What was described was a far cry from what was described by Leonard Grassley and what we're witnessing today. As I was weeding in my yard yesterday and found the constant beeping of construction equipment that goes from 7 a.m. until they're done for the day, has replaced the quiet neighborhood that we've enjoyed. And I can hear it in my house. It's that loud. So I will tell you this, acoustics at Barker Park Amphitheater are amazing. It concerns me tonight that your ordinance allows 90 dBA at the property line, essentially at the boundary of the park. When I went with Mr. Casey, with Sean to the play down, or the concert a couple weeks ago down at the Ogden Amphitheater, I put earplugs in at 80 dBA. And my internal organs were vibrating with the sounds. So to have it be 90 across the street from my house, it will still be 90 or near 90 at my front door. And I've said all along we've had problems with rattling windows previously. For those of you unfamiliar with Leonard Grassley, he's a world-renowned landscape architect. His firm designed Thanksgiving Point and Ogden Municipal Gardens. His plan for Barker Park was much less intrusive and more natural. Of interesting note, Grassley plans called for electrical supply of 100 amps, not the huge power source the city has claimed existed from the start. This existing electrical supply the existing electrical supply over there now didn't arrive until years after the original agreement. Their intent is clear. The amphitheater does not belong there. Now you as a council are faced with the difficulty of making a square peg fit in a round hole. We're chasing our tail, trying to put out one fire after another, whether it be parking or transportation or tickets or numbers of people in attendance. Claims have been made that sound will be kept in the bowl as much as possible, and that efforts will be made to minimize the influence on the surrounding neighbors. However, this ordinance, as presented to us tonight, does not do this. We have neighbors who are up early for work and should not be subjected to late-night productions. There's no way to harmonize with the surrounding homes, and that was a requirement the city put on us as city when they sold us land to build. Our covenants that the city put in place said that our homes had to be in harmony with Barker Park. And now the city is building something that's not in harmony with the residential subdivision that they built. For tonight, I would ask you, as long as the amphitheater here, it needs to be properly managed. Please step back a minute before quickly passing an ordinance that will allow you to move forward quickly. It does not meet the needs of the city or the neighborhood. The amphitheater is a big enough problem that it needs its own ordinance, not to be lumped into an already faulty noise ordinance. They should be addressed individually after proper research and not subject to a knee-jerk reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
Sean Casey, 2444 Barker Parkway. I'm a terrible orator, and I feel emotionally that I don't connect very well with the council. Mayor, maybe a little bit. He likes sometimes the propaganda I sport on my shirt. Tonight, I would like to, I'm challenging myself to try to connect with you. And if I say something that's inappropriate, Mayor, please interject and say, hey, got to change direction with that. But safety first. I noticed the fire truck going up Barker Parkway a few times last week, and it looked like tests were being conducted. I hope so. I think July 4th offers a great opportunity to do traffic survey. We will have what we have had in the past, 5,000 or so people. We could probably get Russ and his drone to do some overhead flyovers to get an actual count of people and a record of that count. We could probably throw out some traffic strips to measure traffic flow on Barker Park as well as 2600, and we could probably do some game cameras at the intersections and get some statistics on how we can proceed. I really think traffic is a problem. Living on the road, I don't think any parking on the side of the residents is possible from a safety perspective, but I'm not an expert there. So Ryan, I'm kind of leaving that with you and our police chief call. I am a sound expert, and that's where I appreciate, by the way, the the ordinance preview a few days back to give me time to actually run some numbers. I thought that was valuable, and I hope I provided you with valuable information. I would like that response. I think it's probably a good idea to have it in the meeting notes if you need a copy. It's already email, it's digital, so easiest. I don't need to go over too much of that because there is a written record that will take some digesting to understand it. And on the understanding part, this is where I would like to spend the remainder of my 2 or so minutes. Richard Feynman, I've mentioned him before. He literally changed our world. Your life is radically different because of this guy. Einstein also, and several others. Feynman was famous for saying, knowing the name of something does not constitute knowledge. I've known Cheryl a long time. I don't really know Cheryl. I've made comments like I know Cheryl, but really deep down, I don't know you. Not like I should. Not like 35, 40 years of acquaintance friendship and mutual friends with Kyler, your son, and Cindy, your daughter, would have us be. So consider when we say the term DBA, we've read it in Wikipedia, we might have studied it for 10 minutes or even an hour. I submit to you that unless you have a degree in sound or have spent thousands of hours studying it, you don't understand what DBA means. For example, 90 dBA with the sound system that we will be backing up, safety first. I fully agree with Aaron's position. This is not the right place for this amphitheater. So all my comments hinge on that aspect. I'm just trying to allow you to realize that when we do move the amphitheater, that there is a way in which we can manage and understand what it will mean with the sound moving forward. But 90 dBA at a border will result in 90 dBA of that same measurement throughout the homes, all the way up to Scott Barker's house on the corner of 2600 and 1050. It does not reflect music at all. In fact, if you have the Osmonds come and they do a 54th reunion tour in Barker Park because they are from Ogden, and they are, by the way, a heavy metal group that has the esteem of Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne, and Alice Cooper, and Zakk Wylde, and a lot of other really hard rock and roll bands, they will be heard throughout our entire city, clearly. And all of us on that row of houses are going to be extremely upset. So I'm making myself available on sound. If you put 3 hours a week in for a year, I can have you with a pretty good understanding of how sound works. Because sound is not just sound pressure. Sound is also power. And the thing is not the same thing. I would like to see our ordinance defined. Subjective ordinances allow for tyrannical usage. Please consider amending this before you vote it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.
I am no expert on sound. My name is Melanie Barker at 2524 Barker Parkway. I have been to the Layton Amphitheater. Their DBA is 90. It is in the middle of a business park, a business area. I have been to Ogden's amphitheater. I was on the far northwest corner during a concert. Stephanie Casey took me. She had a DBA reader with her that was at 82 to 84, and my chest was pounding because the music was so loud. That's where these homes are, right across the street from the amphitheater. I can only imagine at 90 dBAs what it's going to be. Like I said, I'm no sound expert. I have also been informed that the bass has nothing to do with the sound, the dBAs. So you might say 90, but we've got our windows rattling because the bass can be louder. It doesn't register. Please, please be careful with what you vote in, because our homes, I cannot move. This is my husband's family's property. If we could move, I would move in a heartbeat because of what you have done to our homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Barker, for your comments. If there are no other comments, we'll move on to our next item on the agenda. Sorry.
Todd Whiteley, 2380 Barker Parkway. I just feel like I need to stand more than anything just for the record. I didn't really come prepared with comments necessarily, but I think just for the record that I'm not happy with the amphitheater and just kind of the way the whole process has happened to this point. I think I echo Aaron Christensen and what he has said to this point. I think it was said very eloquently, and I thought he did a very nice job on the way he put it. When we bought our home, I think it was we were looking to buy that lot, I think it was about 16 years ago. We met with Mayor Harrop, and he showed us the plans from the Grassley Corporation, and they showed us what the plans were going to be. It did show a small amphitheater in a different location, kind of the size of like something you would see at a scout camp or something like that. So when they talk about an amphitheater, we thought, oh, that'd be nice, some small little productions or, things like that, little plays or something like that, nothing compared to where we're at today. From after what I've heard with what's going on today with the noise ordinances and things like that, my house is directly in line with the front of that theater. And after talking with Sean Casey, he is the expert on sound, which I am not, but he says there's about 3 or 4 of our homes that are right in line with that, and there's nothing that we can do, and we will take the biggest impact of that sound. And that really needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, I don't think any one of you or anybody in the city would be excited about taking the brunt end of a lot of that week in and week out, day in and day out. That is going to be something that really needs to be taken into consideration. I mean, this is the city that we came into assuming it was going to be a nice, quiet park. We definitely wanted a park. And it wasn't like we were hoping that there wouldn't be a park. And I know that you inherited a lot of these problems, but at the same time, these are things that need to be addressed. And now that this is where we're at in regards to the amphitheater, I'm hoping that you guys can take the reins and make good on what we were promised as well when we bought those lots 16 years ago, and make it right by where we're at today. And I know it's going to take a lot of good leadership and in going forward and doing that. And I hope we have the right leaders to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. In listening to my neighbors, I think the city really does, as a whole, have a problem here. I don't think Sean's exaggerating about the noise that's going to go throughout the city. I would think that a relook at this by the council would be appropriate about the purpose of the whole facility. It's built now, and that's why I didn't object to its building, because it was already there almost. But, if we use this facility for what it was designed for, which Mark Daniels had a lot to do with, it's designed to put on plays, and it's designed to put on musical performances of choirs and things like this. If we use this for our local purposes and not farm this out to bring big groups in that we're not going to make money on anyway, that would disturb our whole city, not just our neighborhood, but our whole city. I think we could fix this problem and have a nice facility. But I think a relook at this whole thing by the council is what do we want to do with this that would enhance our city and not just be something that a lot of people from outside are using but it's not going to be for the good of our city. I would think a special meeting perhaps of the council to reconsider the whole concept and the whole use of this that would be for the benefit of our city and not outside. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wynn.
Real quick, do I need to state my name and address again?
Yes, please.
Melanie Barker, 2524 Barker Parkway. Really quick, Mr. Scott at a planning and zoning meeting said that the amphitheater is an institutional building, like a church or a school. There is no church that has 3 things a week blaring. There are no high schools or schools that have 3 things a week that are blaring. Tiffany Staley testified in court. No tickets would be sold. The very next day, tickets went on sale for the amphitheater. I think we need to reevaluate what this building, if it's institutional, then we don't have to worry about a sound ordinance because we shouldn't be using it the way it's going to be intended.
Thank you for your comments.
Sorry. Todd Whiteley, 2380 Barker Parkway. One thing I did forget to mention, and it kind of reiterates what Aaron and Sean was talking about as far as the acoustics of the park. One Saturday morning, I was just sitting over there and standing in front of my driveway, and it was a quiet morning. There was only 2 construction workers working on the theater. One was on top of the roof, and one was down on the bottom handling the guy tools. I could hear that conversation like they were standing from me to you away. And there was no amplification, nothing going on. It was just a conversation asking the guy to hand him certain tools. And I thought, wow, once we start having amplification, I don't even know what that's going to do. So just thought I'd pass that along as well. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Okay, if there's no other comments, we'll receive comments regarding the amendments to revise the site development standards for the RE20 zone dealing with accessory buildings in residential zone. Our presenter will be Rob Scott, Planning Director.
Thanks, Mayor, council members, and audience. As the mayor indicated, this is a public hearing to consider amendments to our RE20 zone. This is a legislative matter, and as such, the City Council has received and is required to receive a recommendation from our Planning Commission regarding any type of ordinance change that involves the zoning ordinance. And as such, that is what is before you this evening, is to identify some standards, some additional standards regarding the RE20 zone as it relates to accessory buildings. Just by way of background here, a few months ago, we had a building permit that came in that was going to provide a very large accessory building immediately adjacent to a neighborhood. And as a part of that review process, we identified that we have some deficiencies in our RE20 zone as it relates to RE20 areas that are either smaller than an acre, and those that are adjacent to R1 zones. So as part of that discussion, we had a number of residents who were concerned, that were working with staff relative to all of this. And as such, as we started to investigate what our options were with respect to that building permit, became apparent that we have some areas that we could make some improvements so that this type of activity, this type of building would not be allowed in the future. So again, we worked with several of the neighbors relative to this. They were obviously very concerned. We have some of them here this evening as well. The Planning Commission reviewed this and had discussions on a couple of evenings, and then identified things that they wanted to see in the ordinance, and then they also held their own public hearing on this particular matter. So let me give you a summary of what is contained in the ordinance. First of all, we reorganized the format of the RE20 zone to be consistent with our other zones, so we put it in a table format. The second thing is that the information that you received was in two colors. The green text reflects no change to the RE20 standards. The red text identifies either new or amended text. So just to make sure that we're clear on that. So the minimum, let me go through the various ones that are in there. So the minimum yard setbacks. In our R1 zones, if you construct a double car garage, then you have the ability to have a smaller side yard setback than if you do not. So for example, in our current ordinance, it says that you have to have 10 feet on one side with a total of 24. So even if you had a double car garage, you still have to have 10 and 14, 12 and 12. You get it? So the Planning Commission agreed that those who are in the RE20 zone should have the same benefit as these other zones. So if they do a double car garage, it could be 10 and 10. So they're recommending that. The next thing is that the RE20 zone does not have a maximum under roof lot coverage like the single family zones. The Planning Commission took a look at this, and just given the size of the RE20 lots and what have you, they felt like that was not needed. So on these smaller lots and that, you have an overall coverage factor between 25 and 35%. That's total. There's another standard that I'll get to in a minute that relates to accessory buildings and rear yards. They did recommend that that one be included. So another interesting thing is that there is currently no maximum building height in the RE20 zone. All of our other residential zones, it's 35 feet. Planning Commission is recommending 35 feet be the maximum height for main buildings, if you will. Next, they looked at the standards for accessory buildings. So they attacked this from the standpoint of a couple of different things. The minimum setback for buildings that, and we have two different standards, a standard that up to 15 feet and then 16 to 25 feet. So they didn't recommend any changes for up to 15 feet, but those above that, the standard was only 10 feet. And the recommendation there is that go to 20 feet if you want to have a taller building, a taller accessory building. There's also a requirement that the accessory building be 60 feet away from a neighboring building. So that includes the dimension, includes where they're placing it on their existing lot plus the adjoining building as well. Next, large accessory buildings we also put some standards in there. Those were not included in the original, in today's ordinance. So our definition of a large accessory building is anything over 600 square feet. So that's a big building, 20 by 30. It's a lot of space. So they put some standards in for setbacks there. They also determined that on these larger lots, many times people will have multiple accessory buildings. And so in addition to having a separation standard from the main building to the accessory building, they also felt like it would be appropriate to have a separation between the two multiple accessory buildings. So basically it's 6 feet. So that was something that the Planning Commission actually requested, that one. And then the rear lot coverage by accessory building is added. That's at 25%, and that's typical of what we have in our zones today. They also looked at the scale of these accessory buildings. Some of them can somewhat be overpowering. As you go around town, and particularly in this neighborhood, there's at least one accessory building that is many times larger than the main building that's on that lot. And as such, the Planning Commission, we worked on coming up with some standards that related to the scale of those kinds of buildings. So what the standard that we have created is that there's a reference to the size of the main building and also adjacent neighborhood homes. Then the last one is a building size standard is added for lots that are adjacent to the R1 zone. And I've given you some building size examples in an attachment. And if we need to go through that, I'll be happy to try and cover that. We also have a standard that relates to the character of these accessory buildings. And so we have a discussion in there that talks about architectural metal. And we did not include a definition of that. We now have provided one for you. Basically, what it's saying is that if you're going to have an accessory building that is of the variety that you get at any large big box store that comes in a metal corrugated metal kit and what have you, the ordinance requires those to be placed in the rear yard as opposed to the side yard. So this helps us out to identify what architectural metal is for those that might end up being in the side yard. And if there's questions about that, we can talk about that as well. Last but not least, how is this ordinance, how does it stack up against our general plan? First of all, we have some housing goals that talk about establishing and adhering to high-quality building and design standards for all housing types, that development enhances the community character. There are some strategies in there that talk about evaluating our current ordinances, which is, of course, what we've done, and create new design standards to improve the overall quality of North Ogden's housing, and to work with homeowners and landlords relative to that. That's part of what we've done with these residents. So some questions for you to consider. Should the RE20 zone site standards be modified? Should they recognize the difference in compatibility between RE20 properties that are smaller than an acre? Should the RE20 standards recognize the difference in compatibility between RE20 properties that are adjacent to R1 zones? Should the architectural metal definition be added, and is the amendment consistent with the general plan? The Planning Commission, as I indicated, they conducted their hearing. They unanimously are recommending adoption of this ordinance, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Public hearing is open for any comments from the group.
Hi, I'm Catherine Warren. I live at 720 East, 2550 North. I don't really follow everything he's saying. Some of it I get. But the point is that I live by the building that was put in, and I'm still trying to figure out how that ever happened and what can be done now, because the people do not live there and never have lived on the property. It's too big. She's admitted to somebody that they didn't do all the drainage system or something around the gutters that they're supposed to put on. They never have done that. And I think that may be the reason about a few years ago, the former owners of the house south of it flooded their basement. It's hideous, and it's being used commercially. And I'd like to know at some point what we can do if we can prove. I mean, someone's been in it and seen what they're storing. I've driven by a few years ago and took pictures. I've seen a beer truck there. Several neighbors have seen the beer truck there delivering supplies. They own a Crazy Cat or I don't know what it is, store, so they store their stuff there. This is not a commercial area. They're making it a commercial area, but nobody seems to know what be living there. My daughter, for years, and I have suspected that. Another neighbor has come up and said, I think somebody is living in that building, that would make it illegal anyways. I don't think they should be allowed in housing areas. It's too big, it's too massive, and I think it's too close to the property. I think it's too close to the other house. And I know that's a fire issue. And I just have one more thing. I am against it, so if you can tear this one down, tear it down. But with the Barker Park thing, the noise, I think the noise issue really needs to be looked at, because that would be really, especially if you had a baby or something in there, that's horrible. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, my name is Scott Love. I live at 2567 North, 725 East. And I'd just like to say that I agree with all the proposed amendments that Mr. Scott is proposing to you for this. I think it would put an end to any more 4,000 square foot warehouses, basically, like it's there right now. So I just want to say I agree with this, and I think you guys should pass it.
Thank you for your comment.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I'm familiar with this as well, and I support the ordinance that's been proposed as well. I think it would be a corrective matter. I know the people that prior lived in, that was going to be their dream house till the end of their days, that live on the south side, just a few feet from this huge building that goes 30 feet in the air or so. And they moved. They felt like they were forced to move after that was built. So corrective action is needed, and as a citizen, I would support that.
Thank you for your comment. There's no other comments regarding this particular public hearing.
Move to close the public hearing.
Been moved to close the public hearing.
I've got a couple questions for Rob, if I can.
Okay.
Just two. Let me pull this back up. Under F1, the accessory building height, it says you can build them, but they have to be 60 feet apart from other buildings. So if they're building 20 feet from their property line, is it a race to see who builds first between accessory buildings?
Well,
because then one would be 20 feet from property line, and the second would have to be 40 feet from the property line.
To a degree, first come, first serve.
I mean, I'm okay with it. I'm just making sure I understand it correctly.
No, that potentially could be an issue.
So it neighboring dwelling unit.
Okay, dwelling.
So
that makes okay.
But it could be a fight between I'm putting a house in before the accessory building goes in.
Okay, and I'm okay with that. And then finally, F4. Says the building size can only be half of the building, the residential building,
right?
The dwelling. Okay.
So again, it's relating to the scale.
So you can't build a small house in a big garage.
Correct.
Okay.
Just to be clear, Council, the exception to that would be an agricultural parcel where agricultural buildings are considered a primary building. They could be larger, because it wouldn't be an accessory use, it would be a primary use, like, a large barn for farm equipment. Correct, Rob?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Rob, on number 3, the rear yard coverage by the accessory buildings. To date, we have been using the actual size of the property dimensions, correct?
That's right.
Disregarding setbacks. So this will, in effect, further limit the size that the building can be by using that calculation with the setbacks and not just the actual property line. Am I understanding that correct?
That's right. That's intentional. You still get to have a 750 square foot building, even with that limitation. So it's still a very sizable accessory building. We're really limiting people to some very small shed type of thing. For sure.
Excuse me. Thank you.
Any other questions from the council?
Thank you.
Then I want to entertain a motion.
We still haven't closed the public meeting.
A motion to close the public.
I already motioned that.
Okay. It's been moved. Do you have a second?
I'll second.
The second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is closed. We'll move on to item 5. Discussion or action to consider ordinance amending site development standards for RE20 zone, dealing with accessory buildings in residential zoning, residential zones. Presenter will be Rob Scott, our planning director.
So, council, just for your benefit, for those who are new, for everything that's a land use ordinance change, we're required by our own ordinance to have a public hearing before the city council. The state ordinance requires us to have it before the planning commission. All other ordinances don't have that same requirement. That's why it's listed as 2 items on the agenda. It's the same topic, but it's 2 separate items. One's the hearing and one's the actual action if the council chooses to go that route.
Discussion or questions regarding the proposed ordinance?
You have an ordinance number?
2018-09.
Mayor, I'll move that we approve ordinance 2018-09, amending site development standards for the RE20 zone, dealing with accessory buildings in residential zones as discussed.
It's been moved by Councilman Swanson to approve ordinance 2018-09, the ordinance amending the site development standards for RE20 zone. Do I have a second?
Second.
A second by Councilman Severing. I begin the voting. Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilman Barker?
Yes.
Councilman Severing?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thanks, Rob.
Item 6, discussion or action to consider an agreement with Double Out Ranch. Our presenter will be John Call, our city administrator attorney.
So, council, this agreement is one that we talked a little bit about last week. Council requested it be tabled so that you could have some time to review it. I did want to answer a few questions that I think have been raised. My understanding is that the city council is buying 6.6 acres at $200,000 an acre, which equals the $1.32 million that was referenced earlier. So I think it was originally talked about as 1.2, and that I think that might have been in one of the previous versions of the agreement. It is clear that for 6.6 acres at $200,000 an acre, it's 1.32, and that is coming to the city by way of a dedication in lieu of impact fees. The way the state statutes talks about impact fees, impact fees have to be used for what's called a new improvement or new facilities. So an example would be if we had I think this is what Councilman Swanson used on Facebook, if we had a 6-stall bathroom and we wanted to replace it with a 6-stall bathroom, we couldn't use impact fees, but if we replaced it with a 10-stall bathroom, we could pay for those 4 additional stalls with impact fees, but would have to use general funds to replace the other 6 stalls. So there'd be a project split between impact fees and park fees, or park general fund is what pays for parks. So that's the way that would happen. Trying to think if there was another question that I wrote down. Oh, I think that was it on that agreement. Did the council have any other questions based on your review this past week, or anything I can answer? Oh, there was a question about is the developer forcing us to put a park in? in theory, it's part of the agreement that it will be a park facility of some sort. From the staff perspective, we're going to have to do some sort of an improvement to the ground there to keep it from turning into a weed patch, which typically means either a stone material, like a riprap is what they call it, or a cobble, or grass with sprinklers. And so typically when we put a detention basin in that's grass with sprinklers, we use it as a park as well because it suits well to have grass that's green for people to play on. So that's the reason that from a staff perspective, we didn't feel it was an issue to have this be a recreation facility as well. And obviously there's still some discussion about what type of facility that'll be. So.
Questions or discussions from the council?
Mayor, I have a question for John. John, so one of the questions asked earlier, I just want to make sure that I understand. There is a difference, a delineation, if you will, between the Park Development Acquisition Fund and impact fees, correct?
Right. Currently, we haven't talked about the Park Development and Acquisition Fund in the city budget because it has a balance of 0. But we have a Park Impact Fee Fund, as most of you are aware, that's been separated out of our other funds and shown on a line item that shows the impact fee balance for parks impact fees. And so technically they're 2 separate accounts or 2 separate funds, but it sounds like they both could be used for the same thing, although the Park Acquisition Fund in theory could be used to do improvements or rehab buildings and things like that.
The park impact fees do not get deposited into the acquisition improvement fund, correct?
No,
the development acquisition fund under state law.
No, under state law they have to be in a separate account. In theory, they could have been put into that account if it had been renamed the park impact fee account. The finance department made the determination to just establish a new fund called the Park Impact Fee Fund, just like all of our impact fee funds.
And even if we had kept the impact fees in the Park Development / Acquisition Fund, we still would have been limited by state law on what we could use them for, regardless of what the fund was called.
Correct. That's what the Impact Fee Act says, is it's only for new improvements. And one thing I forgot to mention that was asked was vouchers. The term vouchers I'm the one who put it in there, was intended for the city to actually give over some documents to the developer that say this, almost like an old stock certificate. This certificate's worth so many equivalent residential units for park impact fees or things like that. That was just to create a paper trail so that each one of them would be stamped separately, and then when they were turned in for development, they would be kept in the same folder so we could see the sequence and make sure that we weren't counting, in 10 years, if it took that long to use those, that we wouldn't be double counting impact fee waivers, that there would be a file that had all the numbered impact fee or vouchers in one location to just help us track them through administrations.
Thank you.
Well, anything else? Any other discussions?
Any other discussion or questions on this agreement?
I just got one concern. Well, main one. Number 5, we're a future agreement. It says either if we don't give them the master plan community, they're getting an R4. It's just like we're promising them that they're getting what they're wanting without going through the public hearing, the notice, and all that other stuff.
In a way they are, except for the sense that the R4 is actually much more. For example, building heights and the number of units per building make a difference. But you're right; it is under Utah law, the city council is allowed to enter into development agreements with developers that deal with these type of things. And so you're right, there isn't the public hearing that typically would come with a zone change.
I'm just not comfortable with it, but I understand we need the land for our detention basin, so.
Any other questions or discussion? I would then entertain a motion.
I'd like another week to look at it if that's okay.
Okay.
Any other comments? Okay, we'll hold on this for another week. Take a look at it.
So this will probably come back to you on the 10th of July. I won't be here next week, although you could address it and, talk about it and then make any changes you saw necessary for, discussion on the 10th. Or you could pass it without me here.
Phil, what's your thoughts? You just want to think about it for another week, or do you have some reservations?
Yeah, I don't. Well,
need to be explored.
Good questions have been raised, and rather than trying to sort through those questions on the fly, I'd like to. I've written down questions that have been asked and concerns that have been raised, and rather than trying to sort through that on the fly. I think in general it's an okay agreement. I want to be sure before I vote one way or another.
Okay. We'll hold on this one.
If the rest of you want to vote on it, that's fine. It's if somebody wants to make a motion, that. But I'm.
No, I've got some things on my mind as well. So.
Okay.
I'd really like another week to the next meeting just to make sure.
Okay, we'll hold on this one until the 10th. Next item, discussion or action to consider North Ogden City Ordinance Title 5, Chapter 4, Fireworks, to establish boundaries for fireworks and prohibit open burning in certain areas of the city. Presenter will be John Call, our city administrator.
So, council, this ordinance, Ryan will be very familiar with it. He helped write this. This is essentially based on the same language that we've passed in years past, typically the meeting before the 4th of July, that have been temporary resolutions. This would actually be an ordinance change and would affect our Title 5, Chapter 4 relating to fireworks, and would establish a permanent boundary. The way it's been proposed is that 3550 be the northern boundary, and then the future alignment of Mountain Road or the current alignment, there's different sections in here that are kind of filled in, so that line has been drawn in where the road will closely go. That would be the boundary line on the east side of the city. So, and this doesn't prohibit recreational fire pits or cooking fires. It only would prohibit firework discharges or like if you're burning your yard waste type of thing. You couldn't do that in this area as well. So
technically you can't burn yard waste anywhere, but
yeah.
This way they really get cited.
Yeah. And the other thing this also does is it actually gives the Northview Fire Department the authority to issue citations to individuals who are violating. Our police officers, like the fire officers during this time of year, get a little overwhelmed, and so it would give them the authority to write people up.
Well, I for one, I warned Ryan that I was going to bring this up, but I for one am not comfortable with 3550 North.
That was the question I was about to ask.
I'm totally uncomfortable with 3550 North. If it were me, though, please don't misunderstand. I like to commemorate Independence Day, but having seen the foothills be on fire before, it's just, I would, if I had the ability, it would be 3100 north. But the last few years, it's been 3300 north, and we've been fortunate not to have something happen there. So I think to go any farther up the mountain is a little bit more dangerous, in my opinion.
Mayor?
Yes.
Part of my concern, if you go up 1050, 3550 north means that the homes that literally back the rural urban interface, the homes that are right next to the open land can be firing off their aerials and everything else, and their backyard is the open land. If we go up to 3550, when it was at 3300, at least there were a few houses. There was a block and a half or something that gave us a buffer zone. But I'm thinking of the homes that are right there at the top of 1050. They're right there in their backyard, and it's not going to take anything to set the hills off if we go up to 3550. I'm with Blake. I would prefer 3100, but we've done okay with 3300. I'm not okay with 3550 and would vote no on this the way it's written.
Even 3300 over on the east side of is even questionable.
Right. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So a little bit of the reason we picked 3550. We've got a lot of development now up on the hills. We're trying to get since we cover not just North Ogden but Pleasant View as well, we're trying to get a consistent boundary. 3550 is about where the northern boundary is in Pleasant View. Down the road, we were thinking we're going to go follow Mountain Road all the way up to Skyline when it eventually gets approved, whether that's 10, 20 years from now. We're just want a consistent boundary instead of 3300 to Washington. Then it jumps across to the canal and then follows the canal. And we're trying to get a hard, solid line. I have no problem coming back down to 3300. I know Chief Wade has no problem either. We were thinking we'd give some residents a break, but we can come back down. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm a lowlander, and I don't shoot fireworks.
You have plenty of buffer zone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we've had some consideration now to
Yep.
33 and 31.
What would the ordinance number be? Is it 2018-09 still?
10.
10 since
Yes,
earlier
10.
was 09.
Since we didn't pass the other one?
Well, we passed the ordinance.
Earlier today was 09.
Did we? Oh, yeah, we did. Never mind. I can't even read my own notes.
If John's okay, I'm okay coming back down to 3300. We just have to redo our map and redo some wording, but that's...
So we can actually redo the wording right now. It's easy to just swap out 3550 for 3300. And then if the council's okay, the map is more for people to see. And so we can just update it and put it on the city webpage updated.
Yep.
So that way this ordinance is in place again, plenty of time ahead of the 4th of July so that people know what to expect.
I was going to say firework tents are already going up, so it'd be good to...
Mayor, I'd move then that we approve ordinance 2018-10 amended to read 3100 as the northern boundary, not 3550.
31 or 33?
Excuse me. Did I say 31?
Yeah.
Sorry. 33.
So you're really going to get me in trouble if you went down to 31.
No.
I would go to 3100 if that was a...
3300. Sorry about that. And with the updating of the map to follow.
Okay, we have a motion on ordinance number 2018-10, moving the boundaries to 3300 north. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Councilman Severing. Begin the roll call vote. Councilman Swanson?
Yes.
Councilman Barker?
Yes.
Councilman Severing?
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Yes.
Motion passes. Next item is discussion and action to consider an ordinance relating to the parking and noise restrictions at Barker Park for events at the amphitheater. Our presenter will be John Call, City Administrator and Attorney.
So, Council, I've got a version I'm trying to think of the right way to approach this for you. Would you like to go through the version that was in the packet? Because I worked on a new version today that incorporated some of the changes suggested to us via email. For example, Mr. Wynn put the idea of the parking stalls being tied into the ordinance. Another thing I did as well was originally the noise section was added to this ordinance specifically just to say there's a caveat for amphitheater usage, and then the amphitheater code section was created in a different section of the code. It's also fine if we pass those individually as two separate ordinances, as some people have requested. It's more of a council preference. I don't think, so we could do it either way. But would you like to go through what was proposed and then talk about the changes that have been incorporated based on comments, or how would you like to approach this?
I would say present your information, John.
Okay.
What you did today.
Okay. So let me... So then this ordinance, the way I tried to write it, everything in blue is what was changed today. Everything in red is what was already proposed in the ordinance, if that makes sense as a change. As far as when you get down here in the language, as well as you can see here in the header of the ordinance, there's some changes.
John, can you make that bigger, please? There we go.
So like in the title, this was more of a technical fixing because we're establishing a new code in section 8-6 that relates to the amphitheater uses. So I added in that word, just saying that we're adding it. It's not an amendment of the language. There were some comments about what the certain beneficial activities were, and so I tried to make it clear it was a performing arts activities that this ordinance was intended to address. I also added the word, it was the real property that we're talking about, not just those kind of autonomous property rights that float out there. And then I added this "and," that was a grammatical thing that was left out and caught during the second review. Another thing that was suggested is that noise be replaced with the word sound, and I've done that universally throughout the ordinance, with the exception our main ordinance, which is Title 5, Chapter 3, still talks about it as a noise regulations, and so that title and the rest of the sections in Title 5, Chapter 3 were not being considered for an amendment, so I haven't added those with all the new changing noise to sound everywhere. And that's the way most nuisance ordinance reads, is they call it noise, they don't call it sound. But I did think the suggestion that it be considered sound was appropriate, considering it's a regulated noise as opposed to just, a jackhammer pounding away. There were some comments about clarifying what the language meant, changing clearly audible to other things. I've tried to make it clear this is not the section that this ordinance was written to start amending, but it was in the language and addressed by residents. So we put it in as 65 decibels for residential properties, and that's after 10 p.m. and before 7 a.m. So that's the kind of language that deals with the nuisance noise. You can see here the term offensive to a reasonable person was in the original version of the code as proposed. That's a technical legal term. Reasonable person is used quite often in nuisance and tort law. It's meant to mean essentially what it says, which is, would a reasonable person be offended by the noise, and the jury is the one who has to decide what reasonable person means, or what a reasonable person would think was offensive. And so there again, that's just something that was a clarification trying to be added to the music and sound amplification ordinance. This same term here is used again, reasonable person. On public parks, this was a suggested addition to move from clearly audible to some sort of a measurement. The 75 was put in decibels, but then it made a special exception for groups that receive a special permit for noise or things that would fall under the amphitheater program. And just to be clear, anything that's in a park outside of the amphitheater doesn't have to comply with the amphitheater ordinance. So someone who was using a sound amplification device that had a special event permit from the Parks Department wouldn't have to use the amphitheater equipment. If they were down at the equestrian park, they would use their own equipment. They wouldn't have to take the amphitheater equipment down there. So the 8-6 section only relates to the amphitheater. I think that was brought up a little earlier. But our ordinance does currently require that people who are going to, as it's currently written, it says that you can't use a sound amplification device which clearly audible at a distance of 75 feet without getting that special exemption permit. And it sounds like there's been several events that have not followed that, because under that ordinance, the city council is the one who's supposed to grant those exceptions. So anytime the posse held an event or the city held the Cherry Days events up at the North Ogden Park, we didn't technically comply with that ordinance. So it would be something that we should do in the future, is get those permits approved by the city council for those type of city-sponsored events. Or possibly change the ordinance to make it clear that certain events are exempted from that rule, like the posse events, like Cherry Days, those sorts of things. Or you could even make it a staff level approval or a mayor approval or something like that, so it doesn't have to be an agenda item every time. But that's something we need to do in the future, since that's not currently incorporated into this provision or this ordinance change. There was a question raised about no person shall maintain or operate in any building a sound amplification device. There was a question about what maintain meant, so we just took it out. So it's operating that sound amplification device, and then it deals with, in a way, that how it affects the city street. And there again, it brings up the special permit.
John, can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
So 65 dB would be what is being recommended for the amphitheater, 75 in every other park?
No, 65 is what's the sound level measured at night.
Okay.
So between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. That would be a measurement for if someone was out enforcing sound at night. So the police technically can do, they do a criminal enforcement that falls under state code called disturbing the peace, that doesn't necessarily have a decibel level associated with it. It deals with whether or not the police officer feels like it's a disturbance of the peace. And that's a standard they've operated under forever. We're just putting a term into our code for city code purposes of 65 decibels.
Okay.
So, and I think, we'd be open to adjusting any of these decibels if the council felt like there needed to be adjustments made. I don't think any of the staff members that have been involved in this feel like they're sound experts. We've consulted lots of other city ordinances and tried to find out what other amphitheaters in particular are using. This ordinance is based on the Draper City Ordinance, which is, from what we could tell from an aerial overview, the closest amphitheater to homes, in that it actually shares a property line, but there are some topographical things that affect that as well there that we might not have. So we'd be happy to look at that as the council saw fit. But essentially most of the language is borrowed from that ordinance once now that we're down here into the 865 section of the code changes. So I'm going to go through the blue changes so you can see exactly what has been added since you've reviewed it. Here again, changing it from noise to sound. This was a little confusing to me. It said 95 and then this said 90. So I'm just making it clear it's 90. The Draper ordinance is currently 95. I think that staff would support an even further reduction off 95. The biggest issue that we have is I think we need to establish some sort of a level, because without something being established, then there's nothing to measure it against, and no way for the administration to manage even city-run productions. If we just use some term that isn't defined, it makes it harder to say no, it needs to be this much lower as opposed to just lowered a smidge. So that's kind of the purpose behind that 95 number. I think that we could lower it significantly. I mean, I don't know what the council feels, but it obviously need to be loud enough that people could hear the event going on in the amphitheater, but not so loud that we just want to try and minimize impact where we can. I also tried to make it clear this A-weighted scale was something that I tried to make a consistent language throughout the ordinance. The Draper ordinance kind of shuffled it a couple of times, and this is the language that I settled on. The next section, it was someone had written in and said that they didn't like the idea that any speaker had to be approved by the Parks and Rec director. So I just put if there wasn't speakers available that they could bring in their own system, but they still have to meet the decibel requirements. There were some comments about who's the person who should approve the sound level. It doesn't have to be the Public Works or the Parks and Recreation director. It can be whoever the council wants. There was a suggestion that it be an Arts and Amphitheater director, other than we don't currently have one. And so I would recommend that we pick a current city employee, and then at a future time, if there ever was an Arts and Amphitheater director or someone else, that the council amend the ordinance to identify that as the person who's appropriate. And right now, I just picked the Arts or the Parks and Rec director because that's the department in charge of Barker Park. But we could make it the mayor or anyone that the council felt was appropriate. You could make it the most junior member of the council if you wanted.
I don't think we should.
So, the next thing, this kind of came up in some of the comments. This comment here to the side. The way this ordinance is written is that the venue won't be rented out until there's a established consolidated fee schedule that shows what it's going to be rented for. The recommendation from staff at this point is to not rent this to non-city sponsored events until there's speakers and stuff in place, so that there can be the appropriate equipment installed, or so that we know that when the dial's at this level, that's that we kind of know the peak sound that's going to be out there. And so there's some of that we're still working through, and I think the recommendation from the Parks Department has been to just essentially do the fireworks, the play, and then a city band performance later on in the summer, and then nothing else amplified. In theory, the city council could authorize this for non-amplified events, but even events like weddings or things that might go on here, people would typically want to play sound out, which would be an amplified event. So that's what staff is recommending right now. And this facility wouldn't be available for public rent until the council said it was. This is the language that Mr. Wynn had recommended, dealing with the 4 tickets per parking space. The reason I didn't include this provision in the ordinance originally was the idea that I didn't want someone to think if they changed the ordinance that somehow it overruled what the Planning Commission approved. Because in theory, the site plan approval is vested with the Planning Commission, and even the council can't override them unless you change the site plan ordinance. And so by leaving it here, there might be a question in the future. Someone might say, well, if I change the ordinance to 8 tickets per stall, then now it's magically 8 units per stall. I think even Mr. Wynn identified in his email that the Planning Commission approval and consequently the law as it pertains to the amphitheater is 4 tickets per stall. So, but I think it's fine to add it in. There's not a problem. Just as, we just need to make sure that that's followed, and that if there ever was going to be a change, it would have to occur at the site plan approval level. And here that language is, again, it's limited to 4 tickets per stall. The other thing I added is I put neighboring homeowners when we're talking about the permits being displayed. It just said homeowners, and I didn't want anyone to make the argument that, well, I own a home in North Ogden, so I get a permit type of a thing. So we tried to narrow that field down. And then the last is some stylistic. Earlier in the ordinance, we spelled out 9 o'clock and then put it in parentheses. And so we're just doing that same thing here so that it's consistent. There was a question someone said about whether the city should be allowed to charge for parking. The plan has never been to charge for parking. That was suggested, or that's in the Draper ordinance. Lots of amphitheaters have that provision, but we don't have to. If council wants it taken out, we can take it out and just, it's fine. There's nothing, it wasn't seen as it wasn't intentionally put in there other than it was already in the Draper ordinance and there wasn't a reason to pull it out. Yeah.
John, in this particular paragraph, would it be more appropriately descriptive if instead of saying neighboring homeowners, because somebody, on the other side of the LDS church on the south side of the park there could say, I'm a neighboring homeowner. Should we delineate that further and say homeowners on Barker Parkway and Deer Meadow Drive?
Or we could, all the owners in the Deer Meadow subdivision are on those 2 streets. We could just say homeowners in Deer Meadows subdivision.
I think that would just further, in my mind, eliminate across the street from Scott Barker coming in saying, well, I neighbor this. Or the folks on 2600, the what are those Anderson folks? Oh, hi, Julie.
So if I understand, Phil, you're saying cross out the neighboring homeowners and then change it back to homeowners, but then this in Deer Meadow subdivision.
And their guests may park along the restricted curbs.
Yeah. Is that?
In my mind, it makes it very specific that it's limited to those 2 streets.
Okay. And then the last one, there was a comment about column H. This is a fairly common provision in the amphitheater ordinances of various jurisdictions across the country, and essentially it just deals with if a person has rented the facility, then they have priority for that facility in a certain space. It doesn't regulate which content has a priority. It's more about who was kind of the one who rented the facility. It also doesn't prevent protesting near an event. It just is, for lack of a better word, disruptive protesting, which is defined by these 6 terms, using loudspeakers, blocking people from entering an event, trying to gain entry to an event without a ticket, that type of stuff. And so it just gives a tool that seemed to be fairly universal across all of the amphitheater ordinances that I could find. So, and was also recommended by the chief of police here. As this ordinance has been reviewed by his office as well. He didn't have any comments other than that was a good provision for this, but all the other stuff he wasn't necessarily on board. Some of the other highlights from the ordinance, there is a provision in here that says when someone rents the facility, at that point there'll be a determination of what fire or police personnel are required, and the people would be required to pay for that as well at the time they rented it. But there again, that the plan is not to rent until the council gives the official approval and approves all the documents. Our anticipation is that that recommendation for those documents and fees and things would come from the Arts and Amphitheater Committee. But it hasn't been a pressing issue because we're not planning on doing anything this season. The one last thing I should probably say is the reason this ordinance is here and why it's here tonight is that we probably need something in place prior to the 4th of July fireworks and the city play, because we need to, the way our ordinance is currently written with language like it shouldn't be clearly audible 75 feet away. The tech booth in the amphitheater bowl is about 75, 80 feet away. So in theory, no one behind sitting in the grass would be able to hear what's going on the stage, and I don't think that was the intent of the facility. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that someone living up near Oak Lawn should hear it either. And so that's the kind of what we're trying to balance. We have had the sound engineer that's been working on the facility do some modeling. They haven't done an updated model fairly recently, but I think that if council wanted to reduce that 90 decibel at the limits of the park down to something in the 80 or 85 range, I think you'd be safe to do that. The best example and the most common one universally across all I mean, I've looked at lots, but it's still limited literature on sound. A lawnmower is about 90 decibels. And so I think that, so council, based on the stuff I looked up on the internet, universally across OSHA standards and all those kinds of things, the universal sound that everyone references is that a lawnmower is 90 decibels. And so that's why I don't think that's something, I think that's why reducing it is an appropriate measure, because I think having a lawnmower run for 3 hours next to your house, even though a lot of times that happens to people once a week, that's too loud. And so I think something maybe 80, 85 is obviously a better level. I mean, less is better, but I don't know what else to tell you.
Mayor?
Yes.
Whatever we set that decibel level at, whatever we do tonight, if we do anything with this or we don't, I think once we do something, we ought to have something where after the first amplified, rented, when we have our own speakers and sound system that's up and in, that we, after taking measurements and we get a better idea with our own sound, I mean, on 4th of July, we'll have, exit 349 or whatever the local band is. They'll be amplified, but it won't be using the sound system that we'll have installed in, so we won't have a true feel. I think we ought to mandate ourselves to come back and look at this.
We could put
after that first rented, amplified, non-city function event, to force us to come back and take a look at, is it too high? Is it too low? Is it just right? I think we need to force ourselves to take that look at that point.
And we've done it in the past where we put a sunset clause on ordinances. And like I think I just mentioned, if we don't, in my opinion, if we don't have something in place, then our 4th of July event would violate our ordinance, and so would the play. And so if we don't have something in place, then and that's the way this ordinance is written, is to try and give us a starting point, really. And so if we added a sunset clause that said this ordinance will expire on, June 30th of 2019, then there's nothing wrong with doing that and forcing us to come back and look at it again. I think the hope is that speakers would be installed by that point, but I couldn't guarantee it because the budget hasn't been approved, and we don't have bids or anything like that. So,
would we, when we hold our play, for instance, this year, we'll be monitoring?
Yeah, for council's information, we have bought a decibel meter. It hasn't shown up yet, but just in the hopes of getting a feel for what's going on. It has tracking. It'll record about 18 hours of data so that we can see, even during rehearsals and leading up to the play, kind of where the peaks and jumps in sound are.
John, what was you alluded earlier to a sound engineer. What was his recommended? Did he ever give a recommendation on?
I can show you the map that they gave us. So this is a map given by the sound engineer. I think the council's probably seen it before. But what it shows is essentially, my understanding is this purple dot here is a where the speaker is coming out at 95 decibels. Now, understand that there isn't just going to be one speaker. Like I said, this was kind of the initial thing done probably over a year ago as they were talking about the topography and how the topography moves sound around at this location. And then they kind of expanded out the waves. I know there's people who disagree with the way this model's drawn up. And for example, this building's not here, so there won't be this type of a curve because the building isn't going to absorb sound because it's not there. But you can see, according to that, if this was at 95 when you hit the parking lot, it would have reduced in some intensity. They're saying by 10 decibels. There again, not being a sound engineer, I couldn't tell you whether that's right or wrong other than it came from a sound engineer. And if you followed it out, it's about 80 here and 70 when it gets to that edge. That is the extreme edge. So from the stage to this corner is about 600 feet. And so that's just the way that this model's been given to us to look at. They haven't, they're still waiting on a few questions from us before they finalize the speaker design. One of those questions is, do we want to have some limiting devices installed as part of the equipment so that outputs can't exceed? There'd be kind of a, I'm trying to think of my buddy his dad had a muscle car, and it had a governor on it, and so it's that type of a thing. But there again, all that stuff isn't foolproof. I know there'll be plenty of people who will say that this study is not worth the paper it's on. I just know that we got it from a sound engineer. So I would recommend the council approve something tonight, or at the very least something next week, so that the 4th of July concert and then the play can go off and at least have some ordinance that it's being weighed against that's better than what we currently have. But I do think Councilman Swanson's 100% correct. This ordinance needs to be revisited as we learn and grow and move forward.
This sound engineer, what kind of credentials do you have?
It's a group called Spectrum Engineering that does, they've done theatrical stuff in the state, out of state. I believe they did. I'd have to find the qualifications from when they applied with our architect, but they've designed many venues, some internal or inside, some outside. So. I think the biggest question to probably start with is, does the council want to reduce the decibel level at the property boundaries? I think that's probably going to be the biggest question to start with.
The 90 sounds really loud to me. But if we're going to revisit this, maybe we start lower? Is that?
I'd rather start lower than start high and come down.
I agree.
But I'm not a sound guy, so I don't know what lower number I like. 40? 50? Like I say, I have no idea, honestly.
I'd be okay with 80.
No. What did you?
I said 80. I mean, not a sound guy, so I'm guessing.
So do we want to?
But I've been to the park for the 4th of July for a couple of years, and I'm sure we'll have decibel meters all over. So after the 4th of July, we'll be able to know real close even if we set it at 80, what it's going to be like at the property lines. And that's an event I think most of the residents are going to be awake for, but like I say, I don't know. I'm getting bad looks. I don't know. That's why I don't want to make that number, because I got no idea.
Can we allow a comment from the audience at this point?
It's the council's meeting, so in the past, the council suspended the rules and let people comment, or they've asked for specific people to come up and comment as well in the past. So it's up to you.
I would just say we permit Sean Casey to come up and take a second.
Yep.
Sean, please know, everybody, I hope everybody realizes that our goal is to make this as comfortable as we can for everybody.
Right. So my suggestion is quite simple. I mean, listening to you try to talk about this subject is extremely frustrating and extremely funny. You are talking literal nonsense.
Well, you have to remember, Sean, we're filmed the same way on this side.
No, right.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to, no disparagement. It's just let the ordinance that currently exists ride, because it's just subjective. It doesn't.
So you're telling us that the 90 is okay?
No. The one that is in place that has been voted in, that you don't need to vote on this. Just let it ride. I think. I mean, I'm not going to file a suit or anything, just because we don't have data. We need to get data, exactly. But when you say, like when John Call says decibel, that literally says nothing other than you're talking about a scale, but it's not even a defined scale. You have to say, for example, it has to be dBA, but that's the oldest scale in the book. And if, depending on content, how you read when you measure dBA, that's for speech and unamplified music. It's literally the oldest scale on the books.
Okay, so from your personal experience and your expertise, when we talk about 90 dB,
that means that
you're
alone
saying
means zero.
That's going to probably be good for the.
What I'm saying is 90 dB literally says that it literally says nothing. You have to define what the dB is, and dBA is a paragraph-long definition. So the proper word to use is dBA if you want to use that defined unit, because it's a very largely defined unit. dB is not a unit; it's a scale, and it's a non-defined scale. It's a decibel scale.
So if you were making a recommendation.
But again, you don't even know which log. So the decibel scale can be referenced differently depending on which log function you use, whether it's intensity, which is power, or whether it's pressure, which we will be measuring, and they're different. So I would recommend that we just let it ride and we know what sounds loud. The problem is the Osmonds in 1973 playing Crazy Horses, check that out on your phones, sounds radically different at 90 dBA than when Marie sings some country song using the same scale. It sounds like one is completely going to cause Melanie trauma, as she experienced at the Flaming Lips show, even though the Flaming Lips show, I'm sorry, Little Dragon, right? It was Aaron that experienced his somewhat unease. But what I'm saying is 90 dBA is extremely loud, because if for a rock and roll show that has heavy bass, because
John,
the bass is attenuated so
but
dramatically.
we're just asking you what will be for this, so we're in compliance with our ordinance for the 4th of July and the.
So
help us out here. So let it ride at what?
Let it ride while you do data. Commit to doing data, gathering data.
Oh, but if we were just to say, like for the purposes today, because we don't want Melanie to have trauma. So if we
it's unavoidable. I think it's unavoidable.
We don't want you and Stephanie to have trauma. We don't want the Whiteleys to have trauma. We don't want the Barkers to have trauma.
But so just to keep this specific,
and the court don't want trauma. So give us a number. And we could still do the data research, but just give us a number.
Let's just let one talk, please. Thank you.
All right. My recommendation would be at least change everything from DBA to DBC. That'll give you a better approximation of music content.
Okay, the number?
The weight, the unit use. So get rid of DBA and use DBC, 1. 2,
this is the starting point.
yeah. If you use DBC, that changes the scale radically and what we will perceive as loudness. So I would probably let those numbers ride, even though you feel inclined to. You just lowered everything for music, for this country band that you got coming.
Just something for the 4th, okay?
You've just lowered it 10 dB in practice for a rough idea of what that might mean to you.
Okay, so if we're looking for a number, whether it's DBC or DBA, give us
same numbers.
Say 90.
Using the DBC unit.
90 DBC.
Yeah, so
90 DBC.
So we don't have a bunch of stuff, but if you just did that one thing, you will save the community a lot of grief.
So, John, can we make sure that whatever kind of research that
And it's
is
only
accomplished
recommendation.
is DBC?
Thank you. Okay.
Does that take Sean, does that take some kind of special instrument?
So if you ordered a class 2 sound level meter, which you probably did, $2,000 roughly. And if your meter was $2,000, by the way, you can make your phones a class 2. And if you need it calibrated, just come see me. I'll do it. So the DBC is a selection on your unit.
So Spectrum, could they do research for us in this DBC?
Please don't use Spectrum.
Too late. We've already hired.
Probably too late.
All right.
Because I think it's acknowledged that Sean is.
No, I don't do this. This is not my business. I'm not. But Weber State University would do a study for you, a real one.
Well, it would all depend on what kind of contracts have been signed.
Yeah, sure.
So that would be.
But when you're gathering data, the university is your best bet.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.
But thank you, Sean. Appreciate that.
Council, the meter we ordered does do it in the C scale as well as the A scale. So we could change everything in here that says decibels on the A weighted scale to decibels on the C weighted scale, or DBC. I mean,
But does it do B flat minor?
I don't know if it does B flat minor.
Well, since we're going to be, John, on this one, do we actually need an ordinance number on this one then? We do, even though we're going to be revisiting it.
So if you were inclined to pass it tonight, then there's two things that it sounds like we should include. One would be changing the scale to the DBC scale. And we could just you could make that and say everywhere it says dB on the A weighted scale or references decibels at all, it will be changed to be DBC. And then also that we add a sunset provision at the bottom, that it expire and then have the council pick a date. And then I think staff would be willing to reach out to some facilities or some universities, whoever, to do commit to do a study for us, and then talk to them about the effectiveness of the study before speakers are installed, after speakers are installed, and what they'd recommend. And I'm sure they'd even be willing to come back and present to the council and let the council make a decision on how you wanted to do that study.
So would it be safe to put that into, when is Once on This Island? Let's see, what will be the first
performance
amplified activity will be when?
It's right after the 4th of July.
Right after the 4th of July?
The 4th of July.
Well, yeah,
the 4th of July.
Right.
And then the show starts on the 6th of July.
So you have anywhere where it says DB to be changed to DBC, a sunset clause, and then the right for a university to study.
So that wouldn't need to be in the ordinance.
Would not need to
but
be in
if
the
the council, if that was the council direction, then we would reach out and find if you even wanted to say it has to be in a university, I'm sure that we could talk to all the universities that are within a close distance, a couple 100 miles, and see if they have a team that would do that for us and what it would cost.
Maybe if we turn it up loud enough, they could just hear it. Is that ordinance 2018-11?
Yes.
What's that?
Phil?
Yeah, just like when we're looking for legal opinion, Sean, you obviously know your stuff, but I want to get more opinion, including from our own contractor that we have. I'd like their input on DBA versus DBC. Yeah, just like we've done with attorneys and everything else, we get more than one opinion to know what's going on, and because you're saying one thing and they might say something different, and then we have to try to sort out where the reality is. And so I think I know where Blake is headed, and I like it. I think, though, we need to have input from Spectrum and then see what happens. Get the data. Yeah, I think data is important. Right now, we're just guessing.
Right. Might as well put a dartboard
I mean,
on
I'm
the
not
wall.
a sound guy, so.
Right. Exactly.
I'm not either.
And I'm just sitting here as dog meat, being ignored. Just saying.
What?
How are you being ignored?
You go ahead and read the ordinance.
Because I
then.
can't get a
Propose
word
the
in
ordinance.
edgewise.
Cheryl,
What?
you propose the ordinance then. 2018.
She might have a comment.
I have no comments tonight. But I do agree with what Blake said, so go ahead. I think data and figuring it out and sunset clause, that's where we need to go, and the input has been great. But I did try to say that I wanted Sean to speak, to amend the ordinance, but I was talked over. I guess I need to be louder.
Did I do that? You poke me. Cheryl, if I spoke
It's
over
okay.
you, I'm sorry.
We'll just move on.
So you know what? Being relatively still new on this ordinance, since we are, Phil, why don't you do this one? Do you remember what we? what's the verbiage on this one? Because we're not really. We're considering an ordinance.
I believe what we'd be doing is it's 2018-11, is that correct?
Yes.
We would move to approve, and I'm just saying this is what we would do, and then you can make it your ordinance or your motion, or Cheryl or whoever. But I think we would move to approve 2018-11, changing the DBA to DBC. Is that right, Sean?
Yeah. Or as concerning music, yes.
Okay, as concerning the music, keeping the level at 90. Okay, we're all looking to you for a number, and with a mandated revisit after we've collected data. I don't know that putting a date on there is effective, because until we have an actual event with the sound system that we have there, the data that we collect is just arbitrary. I mean, what exit 347 does on the 4th of July will be their own little
equipment.
amplification system, which will be, I would imagine, different than a large system that we put in ourselves. And that's the data we really want. So I would say we would want to mandate that we revisit this and see what the data collected is after the sound system's in and we have an actual event.
That is our owned equipment.
That's our own equipment, so we can really see what the sound does and get an idea of what decibel level, DBC levels, or whatever they're called, those things, the magical. That would be what I would think, but that's just my thought.
Okay. Well, then I would propose ordinance 2018-11 that the parking and sound restrictions at Barker Park be monitored to be changed from DBA to DBC 90 DBC, and that there be included in this ordinance a sunset clause that would permit us to reevaluate after proper research the sound at a future date after the amplification equipment is purchased by the city to evaluate the sound that is distributed through the neighborhood. Is that good enough?
Okay, the motion as declared by Councilman Severin. Do I have a second?
Mayor? Oh, Cheryl, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, just second it.
I'd like to amend the motion just slightly to add that we force ourselves, not just at a future date, but immediately, I would say within the first month, within a month after the first event with our own sound equipment, that we have to sit down and revisit this ordinance. So that we have an event where we can actually collect the data and then look at it and say, okay, we've had one event, this is done, it's sunset, now we have data, now we can come back and with some better feel of confidence say that 80 is enough or 75 or 93 and a half or whatever it happens to be. That would make me more comfortable rather than just a future date. I'd like to pin it down a little bit tighter.
Okay.
Okay, the motion's been amended.
Second.
It's been seconded. Start with Councilman Barker.
Yes.
Councilman Severin.
Yes.
Councilwoman Stoker.
Yes.
Councilman Swanson.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you all. Thank you all for your input.
Thank you, Sean.
Next item is item 9, discussion on political signs. Presenter is Phil Swanson, council member.
Council, this is just I sent you an email on this. I briefly brought it up last week. I'd like us to consider on our sign ordinance. I don't think we need to change anything in our sign ordinance other than allowing political signs or campaign signs, the small yard signs, no other size, in the park strips in front of homes. I think as a city we require homeowners to plant, to maintain, to take care of that spot. I think we ought to allow homeowners to use that spot to put up a yard sign for a campaign, whatever it happens to be. We're not talking big signs. We're not talking any other public right-of-way, just the yard strip in front of an established home that we would be able to put a, vote for Phil sign or vote for Blake or, whatever political-oriented, political speech. I don't see the need for us to have that ban that tight on that piece there. The total square footage wouldn't change, that's allowed in a yard. That park strip would only allow the small yard signs, which would go towards the total square footage that's already in the ordinance to limit that. I'd like to ask John if you're all in agreement to come back with some language to amend that ordinance, allowing those signs in the park strip.
I would agree with that, Phil.
I would say no. We went through this, I don't know how many years ago and for how long, to not have taken advantage of it. Went from here to real estate signs to, we went a long time on getting these signs, and I would say no. I'm not in agreement with that because we already went through this and it was a headache. And somebody always says unforeseen consequences. But that's my opinion.
Any other discussion?
Well, you guys saw how many signs I put out, so I have.
You're the main offender.
I know. I see signs constantly in the park strip, so I always thought that was our ordinance, but.
It's not supposed to be.
Okay, good to know.
Any other discussion?
I tried to get signs removed last election, and I was told no, but I like all signs.
So what's your thought?
I'm agreeing with Cheryl on this one. I know they went through a lot of debate, but if we want to wait and see what Carl says when he comes back, it's fine with me too.
Well, we're not making the decision.
Well, I was going to say, you guys know my opinion on signs. It's less is better.
Okay, this is just a discussion item. No action will be taken this evening. So it looks like we're divided here, so we need another run at it.
Or John could bring back and we could vote. And if it gets voted in, it's great. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Are you amenable to that?
Yeah, we could bring back some language. One thing, and I haven't thought this all the way through yet or done any research on it, but I think there might be a problem trying to limit who can utilize that space to only the property owner that's that's directly behind it. But I haven't looked into that, and there's a lot of weird things going on with signs right now based on that case out of Arizona last year, the town of Gilbert case. So anyways, but I think I could bring back some language for discussion. It would probably be at the 10th.
How about you bring back some additional information before we worry about the language?
Okay.
Whether or not there is a conflict, if there's any constitutionality, because political.
Okay, we'll give that assignment to John. He'll bring it back on the 10th. The next item is discussion on purchasing policy related to council-approved contracts. This will be presented by John Call, our city administrator and attorney.
So, council, this is just discussion tonight. The purchasing policy is going to be brought to you next week by Evan. We're making some suggestions on approval limits for department heads and things like that to kind of coincide with our capitalization of assets and other things. But there's a nuance that's come up recently as we've been looking historically at contracts that the city has signed, particularly with developers, for improvements. A good example is a developer will be running a water line that under the code they're required to run an 8-inch water line. We, in our long-term plan, have it scheduled to be a 14-inch water line, and so we'll pay them to upsize the pipe to meet what our future plan is. The trouble with that is those agreements have always been approved by the council, so it's not like it's been, and in fact, I can't think of the last one we've done. It might have been Woodfield Farms several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 3. But our purchasing code doesn't allow for that to happen. Technically, anything that's done for the city should be sent out to public bid. The trouble with those type of situations is when someone's already doing a bunch of the work, you can't pay someone else to upsize it. Or another example that's going to be coming up in the near future is a developer has done a significant amount of work on a debris basin up on 3100, where they call Slide Canyon. It's where the slide came down in the 90s. And it would be really hard for the city to take that project over and bid it out as to have someone start fresh. And it wouldn't be fair to have a bunch of engineers bid on designing that project when more than likely there's a group who's going to get the bid because they've already done 35-40% of the work on the project. And in theory, you couldn't steal their work and give it to someone else. And so we're talking about adding a provision that says that there are certain contracts that will be entered into by the city council that wouldn't go out to public bid, but only when the council approved the contract and there was some clearly defined reasons why the contract was entered into. And the anticipation is this isn't the nice thing about it is it would always be a public meeting, and there would always have to be an articulated reason why the contract was being approved. Those are the situations we can think of where it would be most appropriate to use them. But that's just wanted to have that discussion and see the council's temperature so that Evan didn't get broadsided next week on what the council was thinking about that. So, because there's plenty of other things to broadside him on in the purchasing policy. No, I'm kidding. So, any concerns with that approach? Okay.
Okay, then we'll proceed.
Okay, and so I'll make sure he identifies that during next meeting. But that's what the provision is, and it's about a sentence or two long. But he'll just identify it to you. So, okay, thanks.
Meeting is now open for public comment.
Randy Wynn, 2412 Barker Parkway. I'd like to thank the council for being sensitive to the community tonight and to opening up for suggestions and giving them due consideration. I appreciate that. I talked to Phil the other day about, I go over and visit the amphitheater every day. I'm concerned that it's going to be ready for our play. And I'm wondering whether Wadman is, when we were at the planning commission meeting the other day, they said they had till the 31st of July to get this done, and to me it looks like they're going to have to take that. There's a huge hole all in the back where nobody can come up to the back there. It's all dug out 4 or 5 feet deep, and then they're painting, and they've got. I'd be surprised if Wadman turned this over from a safety standpoint to let us use it. We're only talking 2 weeks away, and they probably wanted to practice on it. Do you have any input on that? Any information? I'm just concerned for I've got a couple of grandkids in that play. I'm concerned whether we can pull it off. I'm wondering if it needed to be moved till August, or just a comment on that.
Okay.
Julie Anderson, 940 East, 2600 North. I just, as I've sat through the meeting, there's a couple of things that I'd like some clarification on. When we talked about the buildings, the outbuildings on the RE20, I own an RE20 property, and we have buildings on it. I just want to make sure that these new rules are not going to affect ours, because or anybody else that already has buildings in place, that we do consider that there are people that already have stuff in place. Another clarification on the park impact fees. So, and this is just when you've got a minute, is Lomond View bathrooms. We won't say anything more. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. If you totally knocked those down and rebuilt them, could you use park impact fees? That's just a question, because that would be one way to improve our parks without going against state guidelines and city guidelines and all that kind of stuff. I also wonder, how are you going to enforce and issue tickets during the fireworks? Because you have no idea. You can see those fireworks going up, but you don't know which exact house it is. And we have a very good police force, but we have a huge city. So just something to think on. On the sound system, I was not aware that we've never been told, and the city has known we've used our own sound system because we used to trade with the city, and it was ridiculous. We'd have to be there at 4 a.m. to hand over sound systems and all that good stuff. And so it would be nice if maybe we were given an exemption for at least the 4th of July. And then on the signs in the parkway, I totally agree with you, Cheryl. I don't think it should happen because you're going to have then real estate agents who are selling homes wanting to move their signs into there. And there are a lot of utilities that run through those ones, and, nobody thinks about that. They just plonk a sign in. We have a friend who got a scout flag that had the same issue where they ruptured his sprinkler system at the time, but there are other utilities in there. And then the last thing is last week we talked about introducing emails, videos outside of this meeting. In other words, people could send in their emails and their videos for public comment, and I totally disagree with that. I feel like if you have a big concern for this city and you want to bring it forward, then you know what? Take the time, get in your car, drive down here and sit in here like everybody else does and do that. Because I don't know how you're going to monitor that, because if people think they can send in an email, your emails are going to blow up. You're going to have so many emails and videos, and then how do you determine which ones do you put in, and how does it affect the people that are already here? Blake, I know you weren't here, so you're like, what's she talking about? But I would hope that maybe that isn't something that's done. I think it needs to be done where you take the effort. If you're concerned about something in the city, take the effort. It's okay to email people, to you guys and say, hey, I don't agree with this, but I don't think it's time that should be taken in the city council meeting. I think it should be allowed to be just done as we're doing tonight, where people stand up. And Phil, if I go to somebody's house and get a ticket, are you going to take care of me? With the parking and the permits for the amphitheater?
No.
That's what I thought.
I'll chief call.
You'll actually call and get me arrested.
Sending animal control over. We're going to put you in a cage.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
Aaron Christensen, 2428 Barker Parkway. First of all, thanks for, I know it's, as I'm watching you struggle with different things here on these decisions, two things. I'm grateful you're taking time to take it serious. Those dirty looks weren't directed at anybody there. Actually, it's just a frustration that when we've got somebody that has some knowledge that can share and not wanting to interrupt the meeting and things like that. And so a couple things to consider. So I'm in a dilemma as a homeowner on Barker Parkway. I want to be able to use my property. I want to be able to do things like when my kids get married, if we want to have a wedding reception in the backyard. And I'm not a dancer, but some people are, and they might want to have music there. The way this is written, we potentially cannot have music in my backyard corresponding with, so we will have to call and find out when the city is scheduling an event at the park, so that I'm not conflicting with what's going on at the city level. And heavens knows events change and dates change. Same thing with parking. I want to be able to have people park at my house. I mean, if I have a family reunion and I have to coordinate that around a city event because there's not going to be parking that I'm allowed to do, or I want to be able to park against my property. But just as we shared with the planning commission 1 week ago, last meeting that they had, we right there on that corner, on that turn between our house and the Casey's, that can be a very dangerous corner if people are parked on both sides of the road. And we literally watched a toddler run out from the north side of Barker Parkway, running across between cars, and luckily the truck was paying attention and stopped in time. So when we say these are the things as we explained to the planning commission, we've got it, it's built, and we're trying to plug it in. We're trying to find ways to manage it now. These are things when we stood in September and said, please talk about parking now. Please talk about traffic now. Please talk about these things now. This is why we were asking about it, because if we'd talked about it in advance, I think it probably would have affected how big of a building we built, and we would have found that we don't have parking for this big of a venue. We would have found that we do have a traffic issue. And I appreciate that an effort is being made to try and figure out some way to mitigate it. But when I say there's a square peg in a round hole, we're trying to retrofit ordinances to fit something that should have been dealt with before we jumped into it. So we will stay engaged, and we appreciate you listening, and I hope that we can figure out some way to protect the citizens, to not waste taxpayer dollars, to not put people at risk, and be able to protect private citizens from to be able to use their property as they ought to. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
I guess we've got a scheduling conflict between whoever wants to talk. Dale Anderson, 940 East, 2600 North. And there were a couple of items I wanted to just touch on. Julie and I were involved in helping with a junior posse queen contest this last weekend. And we held that at the Sheriff's Posse grounds because we have been holding it at the county fairgrounds, and they booked over the top of us. So we had that reserved, and then they said, sorry, we're going to let this other event that has more money involved take the facility, and you guys have to it's just tough. So I would strongly recommend that in your prioritization of booking that facility, that you have some really clear guidelines on if somebody's booked it and you have to bump them, what criteria you use for that and who gets priority. Is it the person that schedules 5 years in advance got priority over anything that would possibly come up? So take a look at how you prioritize what's going to happen. And then, as I've been reading in the last week or two about the sound ordinance, I would recommend that you, and maybe you could do this before we talked about set up some big speakers or something like that, but maybe you'll just wait for an event, but do a field trip. And with your decibel meters on DBC, I guess, stand at different places, listen to that, even go into the homes of some of the people while it's going on, look at the decibel meter, and see what's going on. Stand behind their homes, in their homes, on the edge of the property, and right up against the venue. I know when I don't know what the decibel level is when we do that rodeo downtown, but it literally, that sound literally vibrates your entire body, depending on where you're stood. In the stands, you can't even carry on a conversation. In the middle of the arena, when I've been out there, I can't even barely hear what's going on. So direction of speakers and the amount of power that's coming out of them makes a lot of difference. I just wanted to, on the structures on RE20 properties, make sure that those of us, because as they were mentioning some of the square footages, and when I've looked at it before, I thought, oh, I've got a few structures that might not be in compliance with that. There may be a little taller or maybe a little bigger because they're agricultural structures that were put up. A lot of times, to be able to stack enough hay or get a hay wagon in to dump a load or something like that. I know people who are not involved in agriculture don't see the reason to have a structure larger than your home or considerably larger. But if, a hay barn is a huge structure. If we push too hard on that, that's one of the things that will push agricultural uses out of the city, and will just be entirely an urban area. And then I concur with the idea on the videos and emails that they be looked at separately, not done during the meeting, because I thought, well, Sean and I will get together and we're going to make a rap video for you to play and see how that goes over. So, as far as the videos, I really think you need to be here. You need to be here and express in person your feelings. And the other thing I wondered about is on that sound ordinance, some of the violations are a Class C misdemeanor. I wonder if that's is that a little heavy-handed or is that normal? Because you can spend 3 months in jail for that. And what is it, $1,500 or $2,500 fine? 3 months in jail is the max sentence on a Class C misdemeanor, I believe. So I just wondered if that was if it should be an infraction and not a Class C misdemeanor. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Melanie Barker, 2524 Barker Parkway. Councilmember Swanson, you said, where is the reality, or what is the reality? We appreciate you listening to us now. It's a shame it wasn't done earlier. We were never told as property owners that this amphitheater would be huge. We were never told the cost. It was going to be $500,000. As soon as we found out, we came. The reality now for the homeowners, every time we leave our homes, every time we go to bed, it's the last thing on our mind. How are we going to deal with this? We wake up in the middle of the night. What are we going to do? How are we going to take care of this? We wake up in the morning all day long. This amphitheater is on our minds. To you, you guys can go home. To us, we go home and we know what we're going to get now. We're going to get loud music that rocks our homes. We're going to have more events in our neighborhood that shouldn't even be there, in a residential neighborhood. When you look at the sound ordinance, why is it the property line of the park? How come it's not right at the stage, the sound that's being shipped out. It shouldn't be on the property lines. By the time it gets there, if it's 90 dBCs, dBAs, whatever, it is going to rock our homes. Please, the reality, these are our homes that we live in. Our peace is destroyed. Consider that when you make any of these decisions on that amphitheater.
Thank you for your comment.
Sean Casey, 2444 Barker Parkway. The shift you made tonight to DBC is a massive shift. It will significantly improve your quality of life. So, good job, really. Thank you very much for listening. When this started, censorship and freedom of speech is more important than safety. It's the fundamental reason for a free society. We are building an edifice to freedom of expression. And we collectively don't understand what we've built. We talk about limiting it at every turn. The list is long of why this is in the wrong spot. We were talking about the sound ordinance, and you talked about the enforcement of the installed sound system like it was a thing we can do. It's a thing we should do. I mean, you guys all read 1984. You don't tell an artist that he can only use a few colors because red is bad. And I'm wearing Jeff's, and you can't wear red. You cannot do that to somebody who has something to express. You have to allow them to express their content, their mind. Technology, innovation, this country, the religion the majority of this community shares is the result of freedom of expression.
Thank you, Mr. Casey.
Todd Whiteley, 2380 Barker Parkway. I also just want to echo some of my appreciation for the council, listening to our concerns, and I feel like it's been listened to and appreciate that. And going forward, I think, and I hope we can come to some resolutions going forward, especially with the sound and other things. I'm sure there'll be things that'll come up going forward, and I hope that we can be able to discuss those and we can work together on that. One of the things that, as we're talking about sound, I know over the years we've had parties at my house that have even at a few occasions, some of them been on the 4th of July. I've had a friend that brings over a sound system in our backyard, and some of them been on the 4th of July, and we've had music and karaoke and stuff like that, and I hope that doesn't end up being an issue all of a sudden, because I've been doing it now for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years or something like that, and now all of a sudden maybe not being able to do that just because this new venues takes priority or precedence, and it's on my property in my backyard, and it's something we've enjoyed as a family, so I'm hoping that's not an issue. The other issue too is, we've got, family events and things that come up, and we've got birthday parties out of my family. I've got at least 4 members. I've got summer birthdays, and you figure you got family members and things that come over. You got probably 6 to 8 vehicles at least that'll come over to visit. Not that that's a ton, but if it happens to be on an event that, where you've got, an event going across the street, I don't know that you're going to have enough parking for things like that. At times, that might potentially be an issue. Just one of the other concerns, it's kind of one of the things that hasn't been really discussed a lot tonight, maybe in past years, but I just wanted to kind of bring it up, is just a lot of the debris that ends up in my yard from the 4th of July. And a lot of that's just one of the things I've never ever brought up, just because as a citizen, I just think, you know what, I'll just deal with it. It's just one of the things you just deal with. It's once a year, you know, but it's because of the wind situation going from east to west, and every year it's gone that way except for 1 year. And that year, I think it went north, and I remember my neighbors complained like crazy, and I thought, are you kidding me? You only had it 1 year out of the 5? But I end up, and I know the city council and the youth council, they come across, and the next morning they come by in the neighborhood and they try to pick it up as best they can. But even at that, there's a lot of debris. Matter of fact, even this spring, after I've even scoured my property, this spring I went through and tried to do my spring cleanup, and I still picked up another garbage bag full of debris from last year's fireworks. So it just kind of comes with the territory, but it is an issue, and it just kind of, because it seems like every early morning and evenings we always get those winds that just kind of come through the canyons, and it just kind of is what it is. We've also had a fire down in my just down in the plants down on the back of my yard, but thank goodness we were out there, you know, and we were able to do it. Another thing, when we had my family out in the backyard, the debris comes so bad. Twice I've had family members, we've been out there watching the fireworks as the debris comes down. It's so dark outside you can't see the debris. 2 times I've had family members get debris in their eyes and got injured, and I've had a couple people, my dad is one of them, he won't even watch the fireworks, he'll go inside the house and watch it, and I've had other people now, they'll bring safety goggles to watch it. So it's kind of an interesting thought on that. So anyway, just some things to think about and consider kind of going forward. So, but I do appreciate your time, appreciate the opportunity to be able to work together, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley.
Bob Buswell, 962 East, 3025 North, North Ogden, Utah. Very simply, Council, thanks for listening, and thanks, citizens, for using your freedom of speech.
Thank you, Mr. Buswell. There's no other comments. We'll move to the council. Councilman Severin.
Yeah, can we make sure, John, I don't know, Mayor, if you make sure, I get concerned. I love the mountains in North Ogden, hiking them every morning. I've noticed that some of the roads that actually go up into the mountains above our houses, about around 1050, could they make sure that they get signs up there that talk about no motorized vehicles? I think a lot of those signs are gone.
Okay.
If you could take that under consideration.
That's just east of where you live. Correct.
That's all, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just east of where you live.
Just any, there's like up through Mason Cove, there's a road that connects up onto the power line. Just anywhere where there's a road that connects up into the mountains. I think a lot of those signs have actually been pulled down. So
if you give us a list, that might be helpful.
Okay.
Okay. Councilman Barker.
Yeah, I got a couple things from comments tonight. First, agricultural. You have your own set of rules. John might correct me if I'm wrong, but all these ordinances we pass, agricultural, they almost don't even apply. Am I correct, John? And
there's some state provisions that govern over certain sizes, but even like as I mentioned earlier during Rob's comment, anything that's an agricultural building in a zone that allows agriculture, it's a primary use, so it's not subject to that accessory building.
We don't want to limit, and I mean, agriculture, you're doing it for a living, it's one thing. And also, we do send fire trucks up in the evenings during the fireworks, so we're always up there patrolling. Not trying to catch people shooting illegal fireworks, but just in case if there's a fire, we jump on it, try and get on there quick. So we'll be up in that area. Maybe not on the 4th, but every other day. That's all I got.
Thank you. Councilman Swanson.
Just one quick, Julian, answer to one of the questions that you had, or was it Dale? about your existing buildings. I have one like that in the home that I bought last year. When John was over helping me with his tractor, he said, you wouldn't be able to build that detached garage on your property today. But it isn't retroactive, so it becomes what's called a non-conforming building, which basically says it doesn't match today's code, but we don't have to do anything with it because it was built, at the time it was built, it met code. And so, I've got a detached garage that if that were the case, I would have had to pull it down, or it would have had to been pulled down when a new ordinance, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's all I have.
Thank you. I guess you can call that grandfathered.
Yeah, grandfathering, yeah.
Okay.
Says a grandfather.
Councilwoman Stoker?
Nope.
Thank you all for your comments and your attendance this evening. Appreciate it very much. John, do you have any comments?
Nope, nothing.
Joyce?
Annette just wanted me to remind all of you council members to reply to her email about the pictures next Tuesday. If you haven't, let her know if that works.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a motion for adjournment?
I'll make that. Oh, go ahead. I move that we adjourn.
Been moved that we adjourn.
Nobody wants.
Second it.
Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.